My name is Matt Westington, and I've been a park ranger at Yosemite National Park for a little over 6 years. Now, most people think this job is hiking through beautiful scenery and telling tourists not to feed bears. Sometimes it is. Some days I'll spend an entire shift helping families find trail hands, pulling dehydrated hikers out of the sun, or explaining for the 100th time that yes, you can absolutely die falling off a waterfall, because no, the rocks near the edge are not basically flat, but Yosemite kills people every year. That's the part the brochures leave out. People fall off cliffs here. They drown, they get lost during snowstorms, they wander off trails after dark and break ankles 30 miles from the nearest road. Sometimes they underestimate elevation. Sometimes they overestimate themselves. A lot of visitors come here thinking nature is peaceful, safe, like it exists for them. And then they find out wilderness doesn't care about confidence. I work mostly out of the eastern side of the park, though rangers get moved around depending on staffing, weather, and search and rescue operations. I've spent weeks at a time down near Yosemite Valley, and during peak tourist season, I've worked snow patrols near and Glacier Point in conditions cold enough to freeze the inside of your nostrils shut. I've slept in ranger cabins, so remote the nearest paved trail was a 3-hour hike away. Most people only see the polished parts of the park, the waterfalls, the scenic overlooks, the gift shop and shuttle buses. They don't see the miles and miles of forest behind all that. They don't realize how big Yosemite really is until they're standing in the middle of it. The park covers almost 200 square miles. Person can disappear out here frighteningly fast. I learned that my first summer on the job, a college kid from Sacramento wandered off a trail near Tenaya Lake trying to get pictures for social media. His friend said he only stepped off the path for a minute. Rangers found him almost 2 days later with a shattered leg at the bottom of a granite slope. He survived, barely, but the helicopter crew said another cold night probably would have killed him. A few months after that, a tourist climbed over warning barriers above the Merced River during spring runoff because he wanted a better picture near the falls. Witnesses said he slipped. Almost immediately after stepping onto the wet granite, rangers recovered his body 3 days later, nearly 9 miles downstream. People hear national park and they think controlled environment, like there's some invisible barrier between them and nature because there's a parking lot nearby. There isn't. Out here, if you make a bad decision, the park usually wins. That's why we have rules. The official ones. Carry water, stay on marked trails, never hike after dark unless you know what you're doing. Don't approach wildlife. Tell somebody where you're going, use bear canisters. Watch your footing near rivers. Basic stuff. The kind of rules people roll their eyes at right before they ignore them. And then there are the other rules, the unofficial ones. Those don't get printed on visitor pamphlets. You won't hear them during ranger orientation either. Nobody sits you down formally and explains them. They get passed around quietly between older rangers during long patrols or late nights at the station while somebody's making coffee. Usually it starts with somebody new asking a question. What's that area closed for? Why does everyone avoid that trail after sunset? Why are there Tic Tacs in every ranger truck? Things like that. At first I thought it was just park folklore. Every job has stories. Fishermen have stories, truckers, military guys. Rangers are no different. Spend enough time isolated in the wilderness, and people start inventing explanations for strange things. That's what I told myself anyway. And then I started seeing some of it myself, not all at once. Yosemite doesn't work like that. The weird things here, they happen slowly, quietly. You hear about them long before you ever experience them firsthand, usually from older rangers who've spent too many winters alone in the backcountry. Guys like Daniel Jones. Jones had worked Yosemite for almost 23 years when I met him. Gray beard, smelled permanently like coffee and cedar smoke. Everybody respected him because he'd pulled more people out of the wilderness alive than anybody else in our district. One night during my second year, we were driving back from a recovery operation near Hetch Hetchy Reservoir when asked me a strange question out of nowhere. "You ever hear about the staircases yet?" I remember laughing a little. "The what?" He kept staring out the windshield. "The staircases." I thought he was joking, but he didn't smile. And then he said something I still think about all the time. Every ranger in this park eventually hears the unofficial rules. Question is whether you hear them before or after something real bad happens. After that, he went quiet again. I didn't ask him what he meant. Honestly, part of me didn't want to know. Back then, I still thought Yosemite followed normal rules. Dangerous rules, sure, but normal ones. I thought every strange story had some reasonable explanation hiding underneath it if you looked hard enough. Now, I'm not so sure anymore, because after 6 years out here, I've learned something most tourists never understand. Most of the rules are there to stop people from getting hurt. The rest are there because something in these woods doesn't follow normal rules at all. Rule 1. Never enter the water above the falls, not your feet, or hands, not even for a picture. Tourists break that rule constantly because the rivers up there don't look dangerous at first glance. That's the problem. Yosemite water is beautiful in the same way a tiger is beautiful. People mistake beauty for safety. The Merced River especially gets people every year. You'll see families walking right up to it during summer, kids throwing rocks in the current, couples taking engagement photos on smooth granite slabs 10 ft from rushing water. Some people even wade into shallow sections because they think if the water only reaches their ankles, it can't possibly hurt them. And then somebody slips. That's usually how it starts. The granite around Yosemite's rivers is worn smooth from thousands of years of runoff. Some of those rocks feel almost polished under your boots. Add cold water and algae to that surface, and it becomes slick as ice. Once somebody loses their footing near the stronger currents, things go bad very fast, especially above the falls. The rivers here move harder than people realize. Snowmelt from the Sierra Nevada can turn sections of the Merced into a conveyor belt during spring and early summer. Water that looks calm on the surface can still pull like a tow cable underneath, and once the current grabs you, it usually does not let go. I have worked recoveries in Vernal Fall, Nevada Spring, and near sections of the river, where there wasn't enough left of the victim to even show the family afterward. Sometimes the water pins people underwater against rock shelves. Sometimes they get trapped in hydraulic currents that just keep rolling them over and over beneath the surface. A few years back, a tourist climbed over a barrier above Nevada Fall because he wanted a better picture. Witnesses said he was smiling 1 second and then gone the next. Rangers found his body nearly a week later, almost 12 miles downstream. That happens more than people think. The first dead body I ever saw in Yosemite came out of the river, was 29, and still new enough to think I could emotionally separate myself from the job. We got the call just after sunrise, male victim, possible drowning, downstream from the creek. I remember the smell first. Cold river water has this clean mountain scent most of the time, but recovery scenes smell different. Wet and rancid mud rotting pine needles. The air feels different somehow. The victim had slipped while trying to cross a shallow runoff area after dark. His friend told us they thought they were taking a shortcut back toward camp. That shortcut cost him his life. The current shoved him between submerged rocks and held him there underwater all night. By the time we reached him, his skin had already turned pale blue. From the cold, Daniel Jones was there with me. That morning, he noticed I kept staring at the body while the rescue team worked. "You never forget the first one, you see," he told me quietly, and he wasn't wrong. After enough recoveries, you stop being shocked by death itself. What stays with you are the little things around it. Wedding rings, children's shoes, half-open backpacks, cameras still recording after somebody's already gone. One of the worst incidents I ever worked happened. In near Silver Apron above Nevada Fall, a family from Arizona ignored multiple warning signs and climbed across their rocks near the river edge during peak runoff season. Rangers had already closed sections of the area because the snowmelt current was especially dangerous that year. It didn't matter. When I'm reading through scary stories for this channel, I end up in some pretty strange parts of the internet. But the real horror isn't what I find. It's who's finding me. That's why I use Surfshark to stay invisible. It acts like a shield for everything you do online, encrypting your connection and routing it through over 4,500 RAM-only servers, so there aren't any logs being stored anywhere. Your activity just disappears, and that matters because a lot of tracking happens in the background. You don't always see it, but it's there. Having something that blocks that out by default just makes sense. They also have something called Surfshark Alert. If your personal info ever shows up in a data leak, it lets you know right away so you can deal with it before it turns into a much bigger problem. And CleanWeb blocks trackers, ads, and malware before they even reach your device. Don't let your digital life become a horror story. Go to surfshark.com, Lighthouse Horror, or use code Lighthouse Horror at checkout to get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN. It's risk-free with a 30-day money-back guarantee. The father slipped first. Witnesses said he hit the water and vanished almost immediately. His wife tried grabbing him, lost her footing too, and suddenly both of them were in the current. There, daughter survived only because another tourist managed to grab her jacket before she went over the edge. The parents went over the Nevada Fall together, over 500 F there. Wasn't a recovery operation after that, just retrieval. That's another thing people don't understand about Yosemite. That sometimes we're not searching for survivors. Sometimes we're just trying to bring somebody home. Officially, the park tells visitors to stay behind barriers and avoid fast-moving water. Unofficially, rangers will tell you something else. The rivers up here, they feel different sometimes, especially near the falls. I didn't believe that part at first. Honor. And then I met Kevin Turner. Turner used to work rescue diving operations in Yosemite during the late 90s. Big guy, quiet, missing 2 fingertips and his left hand from an old climbing accident. Everybody respected him because he'd gone into places most rangers wouldn't. One night during a storm lockdown at the station, somebody asked him why he stopped. Diving, Turner sat there silently for a long time before answering. 'Cause there are places in that water people aren't supposed to go. Nobody laughed. I remember Jones glancing at me afterward, like he wanted to see if I'd react. Turner explained that certain plunge pools beneath the waterfalls in Yosemite are far deeper than they appear. Underwater, caves and granite shelves create hidden chambers beneath the surface where currents cycle endlessly. Bodies sometimes vanish in those chambers for weeks before surfacing miles away, but that wasn't the only part that bothered him. According to Turner, divers occasionally heard things underwater, not mechanical noises, not shifting, rocks, voices. At first, everybody assumed it was an auditory distortion from the currents. Water can do strange things to sound beneath the surface, but Turner claimed one diver surfaced screaming after hearing somebody calling his name from inside a submerged granite crevice. That diver refused to enter the water again afterward. Another diver reportedly cut his own tether line during a recovery because he became convinced something was moving beside him in the dark. Turner himself never explained exactly what made him quit. He just said this: never stay underwater near the falls longer than you absolutely have to. And then he got up and left the room. The older rangers didn't say much after that. These days, whenever I patrol the river areas, I watch tourists constantly, especially families with kids. Most visitors have no idea how quickly Yosemite can kill somebody. 1 second you're standing there in sunlight, taking pictures beside one of the most beautiful places on earth. The next second you're in water cold enough to stop your muscles from working while the current drags you toward a cliff edge. And the terrifying part is how normal it all looks right before it happens. That's why the barriers are there. That's why the warning signs exist. And that's why every experienced ranger in Yosemite follows the same unofficial rule. Never enter the water above the falls. Rule 2, never go up the staircases. Now, the staircases aren't officially acknowledged by the park service. You won't find them in incident reports. Nobody from Yosemite administration is going to sit in front of a camera and admit. Rangers occasionally discover random staircases standing miles deep in the wilderness for no explainable reason. But every older ranger in Yosemite knows about them, not just Yosemite either. I found that out later. Apparently, rangers in other national parks have reported them too. Different forests and states, different designs. One guy from Montana described concrete stairs in the middle of dense pine forest with rusted iron railings attached. Another ranger from Appalachia talked about narrow white wooden stairs that appeared in different places every few months. The Yosemite staircases, they're yellow, not bright yellow, more like old varnished wood with this warm golden color to it. Honestly, they're beautiful in a strange way. The wood always looks polished and clean, almost glowing during sunset, and that's part of what makes them sound settling. Nothing else in the wilderness stays that clean, not out here. Wind knocks branches down constantly. Rain stains everything eventually. Moss grows over, exposed surfaces within months. But the staircases, they never rot, never warp, never collect leaves, or they just stand there, usually alone in small clearings. No cabin attached, no ruins nearby, just stairs leading upward into empty air. The older rangers jokingly called them staircases to heaven. Nobody laughs very hard when they say it, though. Saw my first staircase during my 3rd year in Yosemite. We were searching for a missing backpacker near an isolated section northeast of the meadows. Male hiker, 26 years old, experienced outdoorsman, according to his family. He'd gone missing during a solo photography trip after failing to return to a campground near Murphy Creek Trail. By day 3, everybody already knew the odds were getting. Bad search operations in Yosemite are strange emotionally because you spend most of the time walking through incredibly beautiful places while at the same time looking for signs. Somebody may have died there. I was partnered with Daniel Jones that day. The weather had been clear for almost a week straight. No storms or heavy wind. Perfect hiking conditions, which honestly made the disappearance worse. Usually, you can blame weather for accidents out here. Hypothermia, flash floods, avalanche conditions, but sometimes people vanish during completely normal conditions. Jones and I had been hiking through dense forest for almost 4 hours when we entered a clearing, maybe 40 ft wide, surrounded by massive pines. And that's where I saw it. At first, my brain didn't process what I was looking at, because it didn't belong there at all. It was just stairs. A staircase standing in the middle of a clearing, yellow wood, about 15 steps high, no railing, no structure attached. Sunlight filtered through the trees above it, making the wood almost glow gold against the darker forest around it. I remember slowing down automatically. There's this moment your brain goes through when something feels wrong, but you don't fully understand why yet, like seeing a chair sitting in the middle of a highway. Jones noticed my reaction immediately. "Don't," he said sharply. I looked over at him. His expression had completely changed. Not confused or curious, nervous. He walked over quickly and grabbed my shoulder before I could move any closer. "Back away from it," he told me quietly. "What is that?" I asked. Jones kept staring at the staircase. I said back away from it. We slowly moved, backward toward the tree line again. Noticed the woods had gotten strangely quiet. Around the clearing, no birds or wind. And then Jones said something that made the hair rise on the back of my neck. "Do not look at the top of the stairs." Of course, the second somebody says that, you want to. I mean, I almost did. But there was something genuinely wrong in Jones's face. I'd seen him handle fatal recoveries without blinking, seen him climb down unstable granite slopes during storms, seen him walk directly toward black bears to scare them away from tourists, and this was the only time I'd ever seen actual fear in him. I listened. We circled around the clearing instead and continued the search. I kept asking questions afterward, but Jones wouldn't answer most of them. Finally, after almost an hour of hiking in silence, he said this: "You see one of those things, you leave it alone." Then he changed the subject entirely. The weirdest part is what happened afterward. Days later, another search crew passed through the same clearing, and the staircase was gone. No drag marks, no broken branches, nothing. Just empty forest. I convinced myself for a long time there had to be some logical explanation. Maybe an abandoned movie prop somebody hauled out there somehow. Maybe a weird, I don't know, art installation. Maybe rangers screwing with newer staff. And then came the woman with a Pomeranian. That was the case that changed how I thought about the staircases permanently. Her name was Margaret Weathers, 79 years old, late-stage pancreatic cancer, according to her medical records afterward. She'd driven into Yosemite alone during late October and rented a small cabin outside the park for a week. Her family assumed she wanted one last vacation. At first, nothing seemed unusual. She visited scenic overlooks, bought souvenirs, took pictures near Yosemite Valley. Rangers later recovered dozens of perfectly normal photos from her camera, and then she disappeared. Her rental car was discovered near a trailhead 2 days later. Inside the vehicle, search teams found a handwritten note addressed to her son. The note wasn't typical exactly. That's what bothered everybody. It was calm, organized. She explained where she was going, said she believed she had finally found the place meant for her. She apologized for leaving the family behind, mentioned she didn't want anyone searching, too hard for her afterward. And then there was one line nobody forgot. Think they lead to heaven. Search operations started immediately after that. I was part of the second-day search team. We found the dog first. Small Pomeranian tied carefully to a tree near the edge of the clearing. The leash had been wrapped neatly around the trunk. Beside the dog sat a small plastic bowl filled with water and another bowl containing food. The dog wasn't panicked, he was just waiting. And then we saw the staircase. Yellow wood. Golden in the afternoon sunlight. Perfectly clean, standing in the middle of the clearing. I remember this horrible feeling settling into my stomach before we even searched the area. Because I already knew we weren't going to find her nearby. And we didn't. No footprints beyond the stairs. No blood. No torn clothing. No evidence of an animal attack. Nothing. Just the staircase. One ranger quietly asked if anybody wanted to check the surrounding area again. No, we're done here, John said. Nobody argued with him. Well, we took the dog and left, and the staircase was gone by the next morning. Officially. Margaret Weathers remains a missing person, unofficially. Every ranger involved in that search believes she climbed those stairs willingly. That's the part I still think about, sometimes. Not fear or violence. Peace. According to her family, the cancer had spread everywhere by then. She was in constant pain, barely sleeping, barely eating. Her son later told investigators she'd become deeply religious near the end of her life. Part of me wonders if the staircase appear differently to certain people. Maybe they don't. Maybe she was simply dying and wandered into the woods chasing some final comforting hallucination. Honestly, don't know anymore. But I do know this. I have seen enough experienced rangers react to those staircases the exact same way to understand one thing very clearly. Something about them scares people who are very difficult to scare. And after 6 years in Yosemite, I've learned to trust ranger instincts, especially Daniel Jones, because before he retired, I asked him only final question about the staircases. Just one. What do you think happens if somebody reaches the top? I asked. Jones stared out toward the trees for a long time before answering, and then quietly he said, "I think whatever's up there, it's not from our world. Rule 3. Always bring green Tic Tacs." The Tic Tac rule sounds stupid the first time you hear it. Honestly, it sounds stupid the 50th time. That's probably why newer rangers usually laugh when somebody brings it up. Always carry green Tic Tacs. That's the rule. Not mint gum, not Altoids, not wintergreen lifesavers, green Tic Tacs specifically, and only green, not orange ones. Not red ones, not mixed flavor containers either. Just green. The first time I heard about it, of course, thought somebody was screwing with me. It happened during a missing persons briefing near Yosemite Valley about 4 years ago. A little girl named Emily Parker had wandered away from a picnic area near Sentinel Beach while her parents were unloading supplies from their car. She was 6 years old. These are the cases that every ranger dreads. Adults can survive alone in Yosemite longer than people think if conditions stay mild. Kids are different. They panic faster. They get cold faster. They hide instead of calling for help, sometimes. Worse, children wander unpredictably once fear sets in. By the time our search team assembled, the girl had already been missing for almost 3 hours. It's very bad in a place like Yosemite. Search operations became music exponentially harder once darkness hits the forest. Visibility dropped. Temperatures crash. Terrain becomes dangerous. Even for experienced rangers. I remember everybody moving real fast that night. Maps spread across truck hoods. Radio chatter. Search. Grids getting assigned. K9 units unloading gear. And then right in the middle of all that, an older ranger named Brian Keller walked over, holding a small green Tic Tac container. He shook it at me once. "You got any?" he asked. I stared at him. "Any what?" "Tic Tacs," he said. "No," I replied. He frowned slightly and handed me the container. "All right, I'll keep these in your jacket." So, I shoved the container into my jacket pocket and moved on with the search briefing. About an hour later, we entered dense forest north of the picnic area. Sunset had mostly disappeared. By then, the woods had started turning blue-gray and the fading light and temperatures were dropping fast. Search teams spread out in lines, calling the girl's name every 30 seconds. "Emily, Park Ranger, call back if you hear us." Nothing. That's another thing people don't realize about you if somebody at night. The silence out there, it's something else. Once the tourist noise disappears, the forest starts feeling enormous. You begin realizing how easy it would be for somebody small to vanish completely. Around maybe 8:40 p.m., I heard Keller whistle sharply from uphill. I looked up and saw him staring toward a nearby tree branch. And that's when I first saw the crow. Black and white feathers, bigger than I expected. It sat completely still on a low branch, maybe 15 ft away from us. Watching, Keller slowly reached into his jacket pocket and shook another tick. "Ta container gently." The crow immediately hopped lower. I remember thinking the whole situation looked ridiculous, and then the bird flew deeper into the woods. Keller started following it immediately. "Wait," I called after him. "What are you doing?" "You just told me to follow him." That was it. So, I followed. The crow kept stopping every 30 or 40 yards to wait for us before flying further ahead again. Not random movement, either. It genuinely felt like it was leading us somewhere. At one point, it landed directly on a trail marker and waited until we caught up. Then it flew again. And 20 minutes later, we found Emily Parker alive beneath a fallen tree near a shallow ravine. Cold and crying, covered in dirt, but alive. And the weirdest part, she was not anywhere near the projected search grid, not even close. When we brought her back to the ranger station later that night, Keller just quietly took the green Tic Tacs back from me and slipped them into his pocket. I finally asked him what the hell that was about. He shrugged. "Ah, Tic Tac likes helping kids. The bird has a name?" I asked. "Ah, all the older rangers call him Tic Tac. So you seriously believe that crow lead us to her? I asked. Keller looked at me for a second before answering. Ah, you believe whatever you want, but we still found her, didn't we? After that, I started noticing green tic-tacs everywhere. Ranger trucks, station drawers, search packs, winter jackets. At first, I figured it was just some strange superstition older rangers shared, like baseball players refusing to wash lucky socks. But then I noticed something else. Nobody ever carried other flavors. Not once. One day during a supply run, I jokingly bought an orange container instead. I remember setting it on the station table while Keller filled out paperwork nearby. The second he saw it, his expression changed. "Throw that away," he said immediately. "You serious?" "Yes." I shook the container once. "What's going to happen? Evil crows?" Keller stood up so fast his chair scraped backward across the floor. I said, "Throw it away," and that got my attention. I'd never seen him react emotionally before. "What's the difference?" I asked. He hesitated, then quietly said, "Because green brings tic-tac, and orange brings what?" I asked. He stared at the container for a few seconds too long, and finally, he said, "We don't know what orange brings." That night, I understood why the older rangers took the rules seriously. I was staying alone at a small ranger cabin northeast of Yosemite Valley during wildlife watch operations. Tiny place. Just a radio, bunk, wood stove, and enough supplies for a week. Around maybe 2 in the morning, something landed on the roof. Heavy. Not an owl heavy either. It was bigger. I sat upright immediately, and then I heard scratching, slow scraping sounds moving across the cabin roof overhead. I remember grabbing my flashlight and listening carefully while the noise circled above me. Then came the wings. Massive, flapping sounds directly outside the cabin. Walls, like something large hopping around outside. The noises continued for almost 10 minutes. I barely slept afterward. At sunrise, I stepped outside expecting maybe a bear or fallen branches. Instead, I found a dead rabbit lying beside the front steps. No blood or visible injuries, just dead. And sitting on a nearby fence post was something else. I can't describe exactly, not black and white. It was completely black, even its eyes. The thing just sat there watching me. I remember this horrible feeling, washing over me the second I looked at it, and then it opened its wings. Swear the wingspan looked almost human-sized for a second. The bird or thing or whatever it was flew off into the trees without making a sound. When I returned to the station later that afternoon and told Keller what happened, he immediately grabbed the orange tic-tac container out of my bag, and then he walked outside and he threw it straight into a burn barrel. I remember standing there watching the plastic melt while he stared into the fire. "You saw one too, didn't you?" I asked him quietly. Keller nodded. "Years ago." "What was it?" I asked. He shook his head. Immediately. "No idea." And then he looked directly at me. But it wasn't ticky-tack. That conversation ended right there. Nobody explained the rule further after that. Nobody wanted to. These days, I keep green tic-tacs in every jacket I own. Maybe it's superstition. Maybe Yosemite Rangers just spend too much time alone in the woods. But after enough years out here, you learn something important. You don't ignore that consistently help people survive, especially when experienced rangers follow them without joking about them. And whether people believe it or not, I don't know one thing for certain. That black and white crow has helped find missing people more than once, especially kids. Rule 4. If you find a mirror in the woods, cover it immediately. The mirrors are different. Most rangers will at least talk about the other rules if you catch them in the right mood. Late shifts, stormy nights, long drives through the park after dark. Eventually, somebody opens up a little, not with the mirrors. Most experienced rangers either go completely quiet when they come up, or they immediately change the subject. That should tell you something. The official rule is simple. If you find a mirror in the woods, Cover it immediately, then break it, then bury the pieces separately. Nobody fully explains why, and honestly, I'm not sure anybody actually knows. The first documented mirror incident in Yosemite supposedly happened sometime back in the late 70s. At least that's the oldest story that Daniel Jones ever told me. According to him, a pair of hikers discovered a large standing mirror, several miles off trail near an old deer path, northeast of Yosemite Valley. At first they assumed somebody dumped it illegally. That happens occasionally in national parks. Furniture, appliances, I've even seen a toaster. But this mirror was different. Wasn't dirty. No cracks. No weather damage. Just a tall, antique mirror standing upright between trees in the middle of nowhere. The hikers reportedly stared at it for several minutes before continuing on. 2 days later, one of them disappeared. Nobody was ever found. The surviving hiker refused to discuss what happened afterward. Rangers tried interviewing him repeatedly during the investigation, but according to Jones, the guy kept saying the same thing over and over. I saw something moving behind the trees. That was it? No explanation beyond that? The guy checked himself into psychiatric care less than a month later. Again, I don't know how much of that story is true. Yosemite Rangers do exaggerate things, sometimes, especially older ones. Spend enough winters, isolated in ranger cabins, and people start turning bad memories into mythology. But the mirrors themselves are real. I know that, because I've seen one. Only once. It happened during late October, about 2 years ago, after an early storm rolled through the park overnight. We'd had heavy rain mixed with freezing temperatures, high up near the meadows, which meant rangers were out checking trails for washouts and stranded hikers all morning. I was paired with Daniel Jones that day. The weather was terrible. Cold drizzle, low visibility, fog hanging through the trees. The kind of day where Yosemite stops feeling so beautiful. We'd spent most of the afternoon clearing fallen branches from a trail near an isolated backcountry area west of Cathedral Lakes. By sunset, visibility had dropped badly enough that we decided to start heading back toward the truck before dark fully settled in. That's when Jones suddenly stopped walking. Not gradually. He froze. I almost walked into him. What? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. He was staring into the trees off to our right. And then quietly, he said, "Don't walk any closer." I followed his line of sight. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. And then I realized it was a mirror. Tall, rectangular, standing upright between two pine trees, maybe 30 yards off trail. Even from that distance, I could tell something about it was different. The woods around it looked darker. Somehow, the rain sounded quieter near it, too, though that might have been my imagination. I remember feeling this immediate urge to keep staring at it, even though every instinct in my body told me not to. The frame was clean, dark wood without water stains or moss anywhere on it. No leaves collected around the base. No mud splatter from the storm, like it just been placed there 5 minutes earlier. Jones slowly grabbed my jacket sleeve. "Don't stare into it," he said quietly. "Somebody dumped it?" I asked. He didn't reply. Stood there silently for a few seconds while rain tapped softly through the trees overhead. And then something moved. Not in front of the mirror, inside it. That's the only way I know how to describe it. It was just movement. Deep in the reflection, like something tall had shifted slightly between the reflected trees for a split second, gone immediately. Afterward, Jones stepped directly in front of me before I could keep looking. Back. Up. I noticed his hand was shaking, slightly. Daniel Jones was the calmest man I've ever met. I once watched him perform CPR on a dead hiker for nearly 40 straight minutes during a blizzard without raising his voice once. And now his hands were shaking. We slowly backed away from the mirror without turning around fully. I remember asking him quietly, "You saw it too?" He nodded, Neither of us said anything else for a while. Finally, Jones grabbed the radio attached to his jacket and called for another ranger unit to bring a tarp and shovels, like this was already a known procedure. About 40 minutes later, another ranger named Kevin Mitchell arrived with supplies in the back of his truck. Older guy, quiet. Jones simply pointed toward the woods. Mitchell looked at the mirror once, and I could see fear wash over him. All three of us walked back toward it together, carrying a heavy green tarp between us. I noticed something else while we approached. The forest had gone completely silent. Jones stopped about 10 feet away. Don't look directly. Into it, he warned Mitchell. I know, Mitchell replied. Immediately, the three of us carefully threw the top over the mirror, and the second, the fabric settled across it. I heard something underneath tap lightly against the glass. 3 slow taps. Everyone froze. Just soft, fingernail-like tapping from beneath the top. Mitchell whispered, "Let's move." Nobody argued. We lifted the covered mirror carefully and carried it deeper into the woods away from the trail. The entire time we moved it, I could hear faint sounds beneath the top, tiny scraping noises. Eventually, we reached a shallow clearing where Mitchell set the mirror down carefully, and then he handed Jones a shovel. "What are we doing?" I asked. Jones looked at me. "Breaking it." "Why?" Neither of them answered. Jones swung the shovel hard into the center of the mirror. The glass exploded beneath the tarp with this awful cracking sound. And for 1 second, just one, I swear I heard something else crack too. Not glass, something deeper. Nobody spoke afterward, though. 3 of us carefully pulled the tarp back. Broken mirror shards covered the ground beneath it. I made the mistake of glancing down a tone piece near my boot, even shattered. The reflection looked wrong somehow. The shard reflected trees, but not the trees around us. Different spacing and shadows, and way back between those reflected trees, movement. I looked away immediately. Jones saw my reaction. "Don't keep staring," he said sharply. We spent the next hour burying the mirror pieces separately throughout the surrounding forest. Deep holes, far apart. Mitchell insisted on it. 1 shard per hole, no exceptions. By the time we finished, darkness had completely settled across the woods. None of us talked much during the hike back. Finally, about halfway to the trucks, I asked the question that had been sitting in my head the entire time. What happens if somebody looks too long? Jones kept walking silently for several seconds before answering. "Don't know," he admitted, and that bothered me, because Daniel Jones usually had answers, but something bad follows it every damn time. Said, after that day, I started hearing more stories, not officially, never officially, just ranger stories passed, around quietly after dark. Search and rescue volunteer who vanished after discovering a mirror during a snow patrol, a hiker near Yosemite Creek, purportedly ran 6 miles barefoot through the woods screaming that something was walking between the trees, a ranger from the early 90s who supposedly stared into one for nearly 10 minutes straight before quietly resigning 3 days later. Nobody knows exactly what people see in the mirrors. The descriptions never fully match. Some people claim they saw movement deep in the reflection. Others say they glimpsed something standing impossibly far back between reflected trees. The older ranger described it this way once. "It's like seeing a predator notice you." That's honestly the closest explanation I've ever heard that feels accurate. Then there was the boy, Lucas. Reed, tight years old, missing for almost 2 full days, near campground outside Yosemite Valley. Search teams eventually found him, alive sitting beside a fallen log roughly 4 miles from where he disappeared. No injuries, no dehydration, no signs of exposure, which made no sense. When rangers asked where he'd been, he gave the same explanation repeatedly. At the other campground, nobody knew what he meant first. Lucas claimed he'd found another campground deeper into the woods after wandering off trail. According to him, There were tents there, campfires, families. At first, everything seemed normal, and then he started noticing things wrong with the people. Nobody blinked very much, he told searchers, and then he said something that reportedly made one of the older rangers immediately end the interview. They kept asking me to stay with them. Search. Teams later discovered broken mirror shards buried nearby, less than half a mile from where Lucas was found. After hearing that story, I finally asked Jones the question I'd been avoiding for years. What do you think is actually inside those mirrors? He stared out toward the dark forest for a long time before answering. And then quietly, he said, "Something bad. I haven't looked directly into one since. And if I ever find another mirror in the woods again, I'll do exactly what every experienced ranger in Yosemite does. Cover it immediately, then bury the pieces separately. Because after everything I've seen in this park, there are some things I genuinely do not want looking back at me." Well, that's all the rules I know so far. Maybe there are more. Honestly, I hope there aren't. Most tourists will visit Yosemite and never experience anything strange. They'll hike the trails, take pictures near Half Dome, complain about the parking situation, then go home with a phone full of waterfalls and sunsets. That's probably for the best, because Yosemite really is beautiful, especially early in the morning. There are moments out here when the sunlight cuts through the trees just right, and the whole valley glows gold beneath the mountains. Sometimes you'll see fog rolling through the pines while a deer moves silently through the meadows, and for a few minutes the park feels untouched, ancient, bigger than people. That's the feeling most visitors leave with, not the disappearances, not their coveries, not the unofficial rules rangers quietly pass to each other during night patrols. Most people never hear about the staircases, or the mirrors, or the children who only made it home because a black and white crow lead rangers through the trees. They never hear about the strange things divers hear beneath the waterfalls, or why every ranger truck in Yosemite seems to have green Tic Tacs somewhere inside it. And maybe that's a good thing, because after enough years out here, I've started realizing something. The wilderness already hides people, naturally. Every year, hikers vanish in forests all over the country. Some are eventually found, some aren't. Search teams blame terrain, exposure, animals, human error. Usually, they're right. Usually. But Yosemite is enormous. There are sections of this park most tourists will never even come close to seeing. Miles and miles of forest, caves, rivers, cliffs, and valleys, where a person could scream for hours without anybody hearing them. Places older than roads, older than the United States, older than anything people have built. And if something strange really did exist out there, if something ancient wanted to stay hidden from humanity, where better to hide than a place where people already disappear every year? Maybe that sounds crazy. 6 years ago, I probably would have thought so too. But then again, 6 years ago, I'd never seen a staircase standing alone in the middle of the woods, and I had definitely never seen something move inside a mirror that should have reflected nothing but trees. So, believe me or don't. Honestly, I'm not even sure I'd blame you either way. Just remember this if you ever decide to visit Yosemite someday. Stay on the trails, keep away from the water above the falls, and if you ever find a mirror standing alone deep in the forest, don't look into it.